Let me jump right into what I'm up to today. I will be doing sort of one of my PAC-T tests, that is precision, accuracy, consistency, and terminal performance testing, but with a bit of a twist, because today I'm using my shotgun. This is my Remington 870 shotgun, vintage 1980s in there, one of the really nicely made 870s. And I have outfitted this with a Carlson's Coyote choke tube, specifically designed for large size shot and buckshot. So I'm excited to see how this works, and obviously what I'm going to be testing today is buckshot. Specifically, we're gonna do a couple shots with this heavy duty number 4 buckshot. Number 4 buckshot, and this one has 30 pellets inside of it, 2 3/4 inch 12 gauge. And then I have 6 different 00 buckshots or double-aught buckshot, all in 2 3/4 inch. There is Barnes, and this one has 8 pellets in it. We've got a 12 gauge Federal Power Shock with 12 pellets in it. Winchester, 9 pellets. Couple of Hornadys, 3 different Hornady double-aught buck. This is the American Gunner reduced recoil with 8 pellets. Critical Defense with 8 pellets. Seems to be kind of the norm to have about 8 pellets. And Hornady black ammo also with 8 pellets. Then we're going to step it up to triple-aught buck, another Federal Power Shock, and this one also has 8 pellets. But this pellet is a triple-aught buck. That is a 36 caliber pellet coming out of that shotgun. 1,325 feet per second. We'll see how that does. Now, I can't do my normal precision and accuracy test. I can't really run a chronograph, or not my lab radar chronograph with a shotgun. So some of that stuff I just won't be able to do. However, I am going to be testing these buckshot loads on target. I'm going to be looking specifically for how tight this or these loads pattern, and I'll be shooting this from 15 yards. I want to see a nice tight pattern. The idea being that this shotgun, this load, is going to be used for a personal defense, really a home defense round. And so within that very close range, 15 yards, arguably could be shorter than that, but we're going to go ahead and do 15 yards. That's what we do with our handguns, etc. And I'm going to look for tightness of the pattern. Now I'm going to have to also evaluate and understand the fact that some of this is 10 pellets, 12 pellets, and so on, the norm sort of being 8, as I already alluded to. So we'll take a look at that. We'll fire that, and then I'm going to be putting 1 round of number 4 buckshot into a ballistic gel block. I'll be putting 1 round of the triple-aught buck into a ballistic gel block, and then the 1 double-aught buck that does best on target, has the nice tightest pattern, then that is also going to be put through or into a ballistic gel block. That's how I got it set up. Let's head out to the range and see how this goes. My first shot will be this heavy shot, heavy duty, number 4 buckshot. 15 yards at the bullseye in the center of that torso target. Next up is the Barnes Defense double-aught buck, advertised muzzle velocity 1,200 feet per second. Supposed to be 8 pellets in here. Let's see how this does. Be aiming at the bullseye, the head of that torso target. I think I pulled it a little bit to the left. Another double-aught buck, Hornady American gunner, supposed to be 8 pellets in here at 1,350 feet per second at the muzzle. Bullseye in the center of the torso. That looked good, felt good. And now another double-aught buck from Hornady. This is Hornady Critical Defense. 8 pellets, 1,600 feet per second. Bullseye in the head of that torso target. Well, I believe that that's going faster. A lot more felt recoil on that. Now the last of the Hornady, this is Hornady Black, also double-aught buck, 8 pellets, also 1,600 feet per second. Now, if this performs like we saw the Hornady Critical Defense, very similar specs, then we should see, probably will see, great dispersion on this particular round. We'll see. Take a look. Bullseye in the center of that torso target. From here, it looks very similar. And now Winchester Super X, 2 3/4 inch shell, double-aught buck, 9 pellets, 1,325 feet per second as the advertised muzzle velocity. You know, Winchester, kind of famous for their AA and Super X. Heard lots of good things about this. We'll see how it does. Bullseye in the head of that torso target. And now a pair from Federal. This is the double-aught buck, 12 pellets here. We'll see how it does. Target in the center chest of that torso. Now the last one on paper, Federal, Power Shock, triple-aught buck. Going to use that bullseye in the head of that torso target. Yeah, it felt like I pulled that one a little bit to the left. Doesn't look bad though. This is the Heavy Shot number 4 buck, 30 pellets as you saw. Great dispersion on these things. I'm almost certain not all of the pellets will actually end up in that 6 by 6 inch by 16 inch long 20% NATO ballistic gel block. Let's see how she does. 7 yards. At this very close range, this thing just really hammered it in there. Look at all those pellets. You can see some made it to just past halfway through the gel block. That means about 8 inches of penetration, but a tremendous amount right there in that main body. Well, the best of my double-aught buck happens to be the Barnes Defense double-aught buck. 8 pellets. Gave me a group less than 4 inches at 15 yards. That's pretty impressive. Let's see how it does at 7 yards. Fresh gel block out there. Look at all that buffering compound in there. That's interesting, and it looks like just a tiny little group. All the way out here, you know, I wouldn't doubt we'll get 8 pellets. I think I saw one exit and impact downrange. We'll get a count on all this though. All right, the last of our tests. This is Federal triple-aught buck. Again, 7 yards. Pretty new gel block out there. Now that's interesting. They went through. You know, a pretty darn tight group right here. Pattern was nice, but they exited. Let's take a look at all of these results. You know, we gathered a lot of data when we were out there firing these 8 different buckshot loads. And you know, when I was out there looking at the targets, looking at the ballistic gel, I thought I got it figured out. This is the one that really is the best. You may have some notions of what you think is the best, but kind of hold that judgment or withhold that judgment until we go through all of this stuff. Because as I was going through the data, looking at all these results, going through those gel blocks, it's not quite so clear which one is the best buckshot load for home defense. Well, let's start by looking at the paper targets. Now, the first load that we fired was this heavy-duty heavy shot. This is the number 4 buckshot, 30 pellets inside each of these shells. And of course, aiming right here. Did pretty good centering my shot on this one. And we do see, you know, a fair amount of this buffering compound. We see over here the wad impacting off to the left. And what we more or less see is an elliptical pattern, right? Not necessarily a perfect circle, but an elliptical pattern. That's not all that bad either, because look at how it fit this particular torso target. We had 30 pellets counted right here, so we didn't get shortchanged on our shot shell at all. 30 pellets inside, 30 pellets impacted, and a 10 1/8 inch extreme spread between these, or within this pattern. Next, let's put our attention to the second shot shell that I fired. This is the Barnes Defense. This is the first of our double-aught buck shot shells. 8 pellets in here, 1,200 feet per second. A little bit slower than some of the others, but let me tell you, it also felt very comfortable to shoot both this and the heavy shot buckshot. That actually, some folks might say, no big thing, don't worry about it, but in a home defense situation, if you are recoil shy about that big old buckshot load, you may not do that well. Because as you can see here, even though I was aiming here, I still managed, apparently, and it felt like I did, I noted that out in the field, I pulled that shot a little bit to the left. We do have 8 pellets in here, and the extreme spread is 3 3/4 of an inch. And it's more or less elliptical this way compared to the pattern that we saw with the heavy shot. But that's a very tight group for buckshot, and that's the reason why it was selected to be shot into the ballistic gelatin. Now, as you probably figured out, as I was shooting these out at the range, I was always shooting at the chest in this target first, then the bullseye in the head. So that next round, again, double-aught buck, Hornady American gunner, 2 3/4 inch, of course, double-aught buck, like I already said, 1,350 feet per second, and 8 pellets in this one. And we do have 8 pellets impacting here, and also, obviously, the wad impacting just that little bit to the left. Interesting that they tend to go to the left. And the pattern, more or less, again, kind of a vertical pattern, not a perfect circle. Nice pattern. In fact, when I first looked at this, I thought this was the double-aught buck that we would end up shooting into that ballistic gelatin because it looked like such a good group. But when I compared it to and made some measurements, the Barnes buckshot load did perform just that little bit better, fairly better. So we've got a 4 1/2 inch extreme spread, and again, all 8 of those pellets have impacted. Then we moved up to the Hornady critical defense, and this one is one of those that steps it out a little bit faster, 1,600 feet per second, and let me tell you, you can feel it. I could feel it in my shoulder. You could also probably feel it or see it in the muzzle rise as I shot that load. Here's our 8 rounds. Right here, quite a bit of stringing. It's not because of the 8 pellets, but it could be something to do with the velocity that it's traveling at. And over here, by the way, is where our wad impacted. So we've got kind of an oblong shape. Again, elliptical, not a perfect circle, but elliptical in this direction, not necessarily vertical or horizontal. The next group that I shot was this Hornady Black. Again, 8 pellets, 1,600 feet per second. Very, very similar in how it acted compared to the Hornady critical defense. In fact, a person might think, I wonder if it's just the exact same load with a different box, maybe a little bit different color shot shell. And once again, the wad impacted over here, just that little bit to the left. And this is the pattern right here. Hard to say exactly how it is, kind of elliptical, of course, in a vertical direction. Lots of dispersion, nothing hitting dead center where I aimed. Okay, it did all right, but tremendous amount of dispersion. Now, a person can argue this in 2 different ways. Number one, it did not hit exactly where I was aiming. We did not put a massive load right there, but at the same time, it will make it harder to absolutely miss your target simply because you do have that fairly large pattern. But arguing it again, you might, if you almost miss, well, you might just hit with 1 or 2 pellets. So consider that. Let's roll this up to the next shell that I fired. That was the Winchester Super X, 9 pellets here. We can count those 9 pellets right there, and we see again this nice elliptical pattern, very much vertical, and the wad impacting again off to the left. It's just very interesting to me. I'm always pointing that out. Very interesting that it did that. So far, every one of the shells that we fired, as advertised, 8 pellets in the load, we got 8 pellets on paper, and that's good. That's a really good thing. Let's go on and look at the Federal buckshot loads now. The first is the Federal Power Shock double-aught buck. They call it a Magnum buckshot, 12 pellets. They probably shouldn't have called it Magnum. Normally, the word Magnum is reserved for a 3-inch or even a 3.5-inch shell nowadays. But okay, that's what it is, 12 pellets. And they all hit. They all hit nicely here. I don't really even know where the wad went to, but we have a nice group right over here. Not bad, you know, getting closer to a nice circle. Maybe if I drew this a little bit more carefully, it still looks pretty circular, not quite so elliptical, so that's kind of interesting. Got a pretty nice pattern, a couple of big holes in the pattern here and there. Not a real big thing. And we do have all 12. Now, to really evaluate this, understand that we do have 12 pellets here. All the other double-aught buck had 8 pellets. The 12 pellet extreme group was 8.5 inches. The best clustered, now it's a little bit subjective that way, the best clustered 8-shot group or 8 pellet group was a 5 7/8 inch group. Still larger than the Barnes defense and still larger than the Hornady American Gunner. This is the Federal Power Shock, very, very similar box. This is triple-aught buck, however, 1,325 feet per second and 8 pellets. So this one's going pretty good for that heavy charge in it. And again, I called it, I did shoot a little bit off to the left. It felt as I squeezed that trigger or pulled that trigger, and we have that elliptical pattern more or less following this direction right here, not perfectly vertical or horizontal. Again, not the biggest thing in the world that it does that, but certainly something to consider, especially if you're patterning a few of these loads to get a better feel for what these shot shells actually do. And if this were a real life scenario, I'd have 2 in the target, the important target. So just because you're using buckshot, let me say this again, don't think that you can't miss. You still have to be proficient and practice with that so that you can hit that intended target if the need arises. Let's take a look now at the results, the terminal ballistic test results, as we shot those 3 buckshot loads into the ballistic gelatin. The first was our number 4 buckshot, heavy shot by heavy duty. We had a string of pellets concentrated between 6 and 9.25 inches of penetration. One thing that's really interesting is that I actually extracted the wad from inside that gel block. The wad traveled 6 inches, about 6 inches, into that gel block, and that's pretty interesting. I actually extracted 15 pellets, and remember, this was the load that shot very much elliptical in a horizontal pattern, horizontal orientation. So I wouldn't doubt that some of those pellets flew to the left or to the right of that 6-inch by 6-inch gel block. Looking through the slow motion footage on that gel block and specifically looking frame by frame to see and try to capture the largest temporary wound channel, or what we call the transient cavitation channel, watching that, a couple things that you'll notice is that shot column really pushed the gel block backwards, really impacted it, a lot of energy being put into that gel block by all of this buckshot, and what we're seeing right here, pretty good temporary wound channel, that balloon effect captured right there by this individual frame. Next, we shot the Barnes defense into a fresh gel block, or relatively fresh gel block. This one again, you see a lot, or you saw a lot of energy being dumped into that gel block. A lot more penetration from that double-aught buck. We had almost double the penetration. That shot column ended up 12.5 to 14.75 inches of penetration. That's really good penetration in a 20% NATO gel block like we were using. One of the things I noticed as I was assessing that gel block is that the shot pattern entered maybe just a touch above the center of the gel block itself, but it actually started moving in an upward direction. And what we're seeing here is it looks like we caught 1 or 2 pellets ejecting from the top of that gel block at around 14.5, maybe the 15-inch point, maybe even a little bit further than that. You also might recall that we did see a pellet fly to the side. It looks like it flew to the left and impact quite a ways downrange. I only was able to extract 4 pellets at that good penetration, and the rest, ejected to the top, went to the left, maybe went to the right, those sort of things. And you might have also seen the wad bounce off of the gel block in that slow motion footage. The last load that we fired was the 0.00 Federal, and when I first went up there, I was like, gee, all of these pellets went absolutely through it. I was really kind of disappointed. That is a tremendous over penetration. We worry about that a lot, especially for a home defense type of scenario, and it still is really a consideration, no doubt about it. So think about that. But did you take a look at that impact, the energy dump inside of that gel block? I don't know if you caught it during the slow motion footage, but here is the maximum temporary wound channel caused by this 0.00 buck. And just look at that energy dump. Certainly the majority of it in the first 8 inches. Remember, this is a 16-inch long gel block. The majority of it, the largest part of that balloon, is within the first 8 inches, but we see that effect all the way through to the other end of that gel block. We obviously we don't see that with the number 4 Buckshot because it didn't penetrate that far, and we don't see that quite so well with the 0.00 buck, again, because it didn't penetrate all the way through. Tremendous amount of energy being put in to that target with the 0.00 buck. But the concern for me is that massive over penetration, and what's happening inside your home if you tend to or decide to use that. So I think I'm going to shy away a little bit from that 0.00 buck, but I'm not going to dismiss it entirely. I took a close look at the pellets that I extracted, and what was interesting, I didn't want to lose these pellets as I was extracting them, so I grabbed a little pan that I had here, and I started dropping these number 4 pellets into it. And then I realized that I had grabbed my magnetic parts pan and was dropping them in, and they were sticking. And so I said, what the heck? This obviously isn't pure lead at all. That is the wad that I pulled out of it. And I've got 15 pellets here, some fragmented a little bit. But if I take this magnet, there we go. The Barnes Buckshot, no iron in it. It is lead. Might have some tin or something like that mixed into it, but nothing that makes it react with this magnet. I just throw that out. But it's not just a curiosity, I'll say. One thing to consider about this is these pellets didn't deform. Well, some of them fragmented, but the harder pellet is going to be more difficult to deform. We saw some deformation with the Barnes pure lead, and we probably would see that with any of the pure lead Buckshot. So I'm kind of leaning toward giving the full nod to either the Barnes 0.00 buck or the heavy shot number 4 Buckshot. I actually didn't think that the number 4 would do that well, but I'm pretty impressed with how it did turn out. I also didn't know even what to expect at all from the Barnes defense, but it did pretty darn well. Anyway, another consideration here is this. Think about the actual energy that is available and delivered by that Buckshot. Now, we oftentimes, see in the movies, person gets shot with the Buckshot and they literally fly across the room through a door, through a window, and all this very, very dramatic stuff. Well, you know, buckshot really won't do that. There's no firearm that'll actually do it. Let's look at some real numbers here. I stumbled upon a site where the person was arguing that the buckshot is so much better than 9mm and those 38, 380, those sort of things, because you've got an ounce or an ounce and a half of shot that's hammering that target simultaneously, and then you do the calculations and it's this tremendous amount of energy that's being delivered. But that's not true. That's not correct. That's not the correct way to calculate that. Let's take a look at this a little bit more realistically. For this number 4 buckshot, each of those pellets is about 1/4 of an inch in size, 0.24 inches in size. With 30 pellets, that is 20.6 grains per pellet, traveling at 1,250 feet per second. That gives us 71 foot-pounds of energy per pellet. 71. Or 2,143.5 foot-pounds of energy for the entire 618 grain column. Now you see the misconception here is that you've got a 618 grain shot, like a slug, hitting that target. And that's not correct. I mean, the analogy would be, okay, well, let me fire 10 9mm rounds into the target as quickly as I can, or 6 or 7 or something like that, to give me that equivalent 618 grains. So you have to look at it correctly that way. Now let's compare those numbers with the double-aught and the triple-aught buck. Double-aught buck, each of those pellets is 0.33 inch in diameter, so pretty good size pellet, much larger than the number 4. With those 8 pellets at 53 grains each, we are delivering 186.6 foot-pounds of energy per pellet. That's twice as much energy as we were getting with that number 4 buckshot. And they're both traveling at the same muzzle velocity. 1,492 foot-pounds for the entire shot column. But like I said, that is not a really realistic way of looking at that. The triple-aught buck, 0.36 inch pellets, and realistically that triple-aught buck is the size of a 9mm bullet. Diameter-wise, it is. If you reload, you know that the 9mm bullets are 0.355. This is 0.36, pretty darn similar. Now let's look at the numbers for triple-aught buck. 8 pellets once again, that's realistic. 56 grains each, giving us 194.3 foot-pounds of energy delivered per pellet. Just a little bit more than the double-aught buck. But what we didn't have that good of a pattern from the triple-aught buck that we tested compared to the Barnes Defense. And remember, the triple-aught buck, probably because of that increased velocity, but it traveled all the way through. There's that concern with over-penetration. So looking at those energy results and looking at the translation of that energy, those numbers into the gel blocks, that double-aught buck looks awful good. My concern with the number 4 buckshot is it just didn't penetrate very much. The shot column really didn't penetrate very much, very deeply into that target. And probably that's because each of those pellets does not have that much energy, quite a bit lower than we're getting with the double-aught buck. So while it might be a compromise, you might say, it might also be the best of all worlds. Barnes Defense ended up patterning really nicely on paper. That was at 15 yards, remember. It penetrated very nicely in that 20% NATO gel block. we've got a lot of energy being dumped both visually, we could see that with that temporary wound channel, and by looking at the actual numbers generated by this thing. So if I had to choose one of these three that I tested today, or one of these that I tested today for my home defense load, I think I would go with that Barnes Defense. And I keep stressing that this is a home defense load because I can't see a person carrying a shotgun for everyday concealed carry, because it's hard to conceal, right? Well, anyway, thanks a bunch for watching. Thanks a bunch for sticking with me all the way through this analysis. I hope you enjoyed, and like to have a little conversation with you. If you've got some other ideas, some other observations, feel free to post those, share those in the comments section below. Until next time, take care.